Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views with myself, Salalo Makwidire. And this morning, we'll be turning our attention to Israel, where the political landscape continues to shift into increasingly hard right territory. National Security Minister Itamar Ben Gvir and members of the Osma Yehudi Party arrived in the Knesset. This is parliament in Israel, and they were wearing noose-shaped lapel pins, a visual endorsement of a death penalty bill aimed exclusively at Palestinians accused of killing Israelis on what the government calls nationalistic grounds. And if passed, this legislation would grant judges the power to impose capital punishment in cases involving Palestinians. But notably, and I think this is the most concerning and interesting bit of this piece of legislation, the fact that it excludes Israelis who kill Palestinians under similar circumstances. Critics, including human rights groups, legal scholars, and members of the opposition, have described the bill as discriminatory, inflammatory, and fundamentally incompatible with democratic and international legal standards. And this comes amid mounting concern over the rising number of Palestinian deaths in Israeli custody and escalating rhetoric from senior government officials. We now speak to Dr. Ofer Cassif, a member of the Knesset of the Jewish-Arab Hadash party. They're one of the most outspoken critics of the current far-right coalition. Doc, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to News and Views. Really appreciate you giving us your time this morning.
Thank you very much. If I just may correct
Yes.
like what you said before, the difference in this bill, this fascist, racist bill, I must say, is that the judges will be obliged because they are authorized to do it already. There is already a law.
Obliged. That's very, very important.
The law is going to oblige them to execute the so-called death penalty, or to rule the death penalty. So that's a huge difference. Of course, there are some other ingredients, so to speak, which make this bill, as I said before, racist and clearly a fascist one, like all the government.
No, thank you so much for that. And I think it was very, very important to note. I want to touch on that image of some of the government ministers entering parliament wearing those noose-shaped kind of pins. It was a very striking kind of moment. But just beyond the political theater, what message do you believe Ben Gvir intended to send both to Palestinians and to the Israeli public?
Well, first I must say that the motto of this minister, a Jewish supremacist and supporter of Arab murderers and his racist gang, has always been a good Arab is a dead Arab. And today they are implementing this as a government policy in genocide in Gaza, in daily pogroms and state terrorism in the occupied West Bank, in violent fascism within Israel proper. So that shouldn't come as a surprise. Those who know this minister and the gang around him, so-called government of Israel, should not be surprised by this news and by this theater, but mainly about this, the gist of and the essence of this bill. They want to kill Arabs, and if they can do it illegally, they do it illegally like they've done before. And if they can do it, so to speak, in accordance with the law, so be it. So this is exactly what they want to show to the Palestinians and the Israelis. And let's not forget that the specific pin that they wore bears a lot of memories, bad memories, to anyone who has a slight knowledge about the past of the KKK in the south of the United States, because this specific news was used by the Ku Klux Klan in the south parts of the United States against the black population. So that only shows to what abyss the Israeli society, generally speaking, of course, that doesn't say that the majority of the Israelis, let alone all Israelis, embrace this disgusting thing. But unfortunately, there's a huge portion of the population that does, and it shows to what kind of moral abyss we've been deteriorated to. It's very depressing and very painful for me. By the way, first and foremost, as a socialist, as a humanist, as a Democrat, but also as a Jew whose family was butchered by the Nazis 80 and 90 years ago. That gives me the shiver.
I want to touch on, the democratic aspect of it, because the bill, as we mentioned, applies exclusively only to Palestinians. From a legal standpoint, how does a two-tier justice system of this nature fit within Israel's constitutional framework? And I know this is an obvious question. How does it violate international humanitarian law?
Well, it violates international law, humanitarian law, and some other, rules and decisions by different, not only by different, conventions and decisions by the United Nations, etc. In that it's multi-layered, because I personally, my comrades oppose any kind of so-called death penalty anywhere. So, but on top of that, this is a clearly, as you mentioned correctly, that is a clearly a racist bill, because it is intended to apply solely to Palestinians who kill Jews. It will not be applied to Jews who killed Palestinians, and not even to Palestinians who killed Palestinians. So it's clearly a racial bill, like the old government. And as I said before, and I want that to be, digested by our viewers, that the motto of this minister and the gang, his so-called party or movement, and eventually the old government, the motto is that a good Arab is a dead Arab, and now they have the power to implement it as a policy, and that is another layer of this policy. It's not the only one, by the way. And in fact, in practice, Palestinians have been killed almost on a daily basis, not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank and within Israel proper by crime organizations, by a criminal mob that is collaborated by the state apparatus, including the police. And that's another means to get rid, as it were, of as many Palestinians as possible. So this is, a kind of an unholy trinity. The state kills Palestinians in Gaza by genocidal means, kills Palestinians and ethnically cleanse them in the West Bank by using terrorist mob of the settlers under the auspices of the occupation forces, and more often than not by the collaboration of those forces. And it is also implementing this kind of a genocidal policy within Israel proper by allowing Arab criminal organizations known to the police and the state apparatus to act freely and kill each other and innocent Palestinians. Up till now, in this year, hundreds of Palestinian citizens in Israel were already killed by criminal organizations under the auspices of the Israeli police. Unfortunately, in South Africa, you know exactly the past of the apartheid and how it functioned against the black population and, of course, some other populations. It's very similar what's going on here. Just add to that the occupation, the military rule, and you get the exact picture. So this news is just another layer. It's just another aspect of the master plan of a genocidal racist policy of this specific government against the Palestinians, and by the way, against us, Jewish democratic opposition to the occupation and the genocidal policy. We are under threat and we are persecuted as well, either by being arrested or fired from our workplaces or beaten. So that's the situation now.
And one thing that was, concerning for me is, there've been reports that there's been, a sharp increase in Palestinian deaths in Israeli custody in recent years, particularly under Ben Gvir's term. How does the death penalty bill almost, intersect with concerns about abuse, about neglect, and the impunity inside the prison system?
The prison system, let's say it very clearly, was never very sympathetic to, either prisoner, but firstly and mostly to Palestinian political prisoners. And but as you said correctly, under this government, and I wouldn't like to say under Ben Gvir, because that leaves the other parts of the government, mainly the prime minister, intact. And we shouldn't do that, because the responsibility is of the entire government and all the ministers, and mainly the prime minister. So we shouldn't forget that. It's not only a collective responsibility, but it is a direct responsibility, because everybody knows about the policy of Ben Gvir's and endorses it. Let's not forget that. In the last 2 years, since the massacre for 7 October, which we all condemned, of course, around 100 Palestinian prisoners were killed or died in the prison system under suspicious circumstances. And obviously, again, unfortunately, South Africa has its own experience and knows exactly what was going on during the apartheid regime to ANCs or PNCs or other anti-apartheid activists who were imprisoned. We all know about it. It's very similar here, because although it's not ruled formally by the courts or by the prison system itself or by any kind of investigative committee, because none was established or formed, formally there's no any rule that those Palestinians were murdered. But let's say that it seems quite clear that the vast majority, if not all of them, didn't really die of natural causes, so to speak, to say the least. So it does raise a clear and real and grave suspicions regarding the attitude those prisoners get from the prison system and the officers there.
Very, very concerning. Lastly, before I let you go, Doc, what mechanisms, if there are any, exist to challenge or block this bill? And if it does pass, what legal or constitutional recourse would still be available at that point?
Well, first we try to continue our struggle against this bill. Like there are more than 100 bills and laws that this fascist government intends to enact or already enacted. And we, as Hadash, Ta'al, our faction, we do our best to stand very firm against those bills and against legislation, this racist, fascist, deadly legislation. Unfortunately, we have 5 seats in the parliament that has altogether 120. So you can imagine that we are far from being the majority. And unfortunately, the vast majority of the opposition, let alone the coalition, if not support those bills, or at least some of them, don't do anything to block them. For instance, the biggest faction in the Knesset that belongs formally to the opposition and supposedly leads the opposition, the Yesh Atid, Mr. Yair Lapid's faction, that has 24 seats at the moment. Normally, when there are votes against such fascist bills, they run out. They normally refrain from voting against those bills. So it's very, very tough. We do need the international community on our side. And I must emphasize two things, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
When the international community, first of all, the international community must do something. We all know that throughout 2 years of genocide in Gaza, generally speaking, the international community hasn't done anything. And when it began to do something, for instance, at the Security Council of the United Nations, so it was too little, too late, and vetoed by the North American imperialists. So, but still, it was too little and too late when most of the governments and the international community woke up. I want to salute South Africa government for appealing to the International Court of Justice in The Hague already in November 23 in demanding to investigate whether there was genocide in Gaza. By the way, I don't know if you know, but it's important for me to say, even if it is it bears personal issues, that I was suspended from the Knesset for 6 months and almost impeached because I joined a petition in support of South Africa's appeal to the ICJ. So that shows been silence within the parliament as well. But we are doing our best. We need your support. We need your support. And it's very important for me to emphasize, this is not anti-Israeli. We are not against the state of Israel. We are against the government of Israel. But our struggle for the liberation of the Palestinian people, for implementing and realizing the basic and natural rights of the Palestinian people, for self-determination, for independence, for statehood alongside the state of Israel, and for equality within the state of Israel, this is not anti-Israel. This is part of our struggle to make Israel a better society, to make Israel a real democracy. And it's very important for everybody who wants the Palestinians to be liberated, not to go astray after different anti-Semites. Anti-Semitism is a crime. Anti-Zionism is a duty.
No, most definitely. Dr. Cassif, thank you so much for joining us and giving us your time. I hope we chat again soon to get a real-time update on this horrendous bill. But we're going to review for now. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. All the best. Have a nice day.
Thank you so much. That was Dr. Ofer Cassif, member of the Knesset for the Jewish-Arab Hadash party, offering very, very critical insight into Israel's escalating political climate and the implications, I think horrendous implications of the death penalty bill that would apply only to Palestinians. And as the legislation moves through the Knesset, the questions of discrimination, state violence, and democratic backsliding remain front and center of all of this. And it's happening, let's not forget, amid a genocide. Israel's genocidal war on Gaza has killed at least more than 70,000 people, more than 70,000 Palestinians, innocent men, women, and children, and has wounded almost 200,000 people since October 2023. And since this quote-unquote ceasefire has been put into effect, there's been more than 347 Palestinians that have been killed and almost 1,000 that have been injured. So as the world continues to move forward, it seems that the conversation around Palestine and the genocide that's happening, perpetuated by Israel, slowly dying down. You don't see as many protests as you did. You don't see as many social media activist posts as you did. It is still happening. Almost 400 people have been killed since the enactment of that ceasefire, should we call it. And things are not any better than they were. Palestine is still occupied. The people are still silenced. People are still disappearing. Journalists are still being killed. Healthcare workers are still being killed. It is not any better, and it's up to us to make sure that the conversation doesn't die down. You're listening to News and Views. Stay with us.